Hail, sorceress! Welcome to part 2 of my History and Games video series on Medea, the most evil woman in all of Greek mythology. In the first part, I recounted the canonical version of Medea's terrifying tale, and in this episode, I'll be talking about the fascinating and often terrifying history behind her story. But let's quickly review who Medea is and what she's infamous for. Now in Hades 2, Medea seems to be helpful. After all, her debuffing nightly curses make it easier for players to overcome tough foes. But Medea's vengeful nature and eccentric sorcery hints at her evil nature. And boy, is she evil. Tradition states that Medea was a princess of Colchis and the prickly proud wife of Jason, the heroic Argonaut from Greek myth. She's most famous for killing her children despite her unfaithful husband, as is first attested by Euripides in his 5th century BCE tragedy, Medea. But filicide wasn't her only sin. The ancient Greeks accused her of several heinous crimes, including killing her own brother and dismembering his corpse, tricking a king's daughters into murdering their father, poisoning her rival, killing her uncle, drugging her enemies, murdering an innocent robot, nearly killing the hero Theseus, and cursing the entire island of Crete. The latter of which I didn't include in my last episode, as it sounds a lot like a retelling or repackaging of a much older story involving the 6th century BCE philosopher Epimenides. Nonetheless, it goes on the list. At any rate, Medea was never brought to justice for her misconduct, leaving us to wonder why. And the answer lies in the evolution of her story. In order to untangle the history of Medea, we need to go all the way back to the earliest sources on her. So let's do that. Medea makes her official Greek debut in Hesiod's 8th century BCE poem, the Theogony, which recounts the cosmic genealogy of the gods and demi-heroes. In the Theogony, Medea is said to be the daughter of King Aedes and a sea nymph named Medea, as well as the granddaughter of the sun god Helios. Hesiod describes Medea as having slim ankles and glancing eyes, and recounts how the hero Jason took Medea as his bride and sailed home to Greece after successfully enduring many hard trials at the instigation of one King Peleus. After that, Medea bore him a son named Medeus, who was fostered by the famous centaur Charon and brought up in the mountains. And that's all Hesiod has to say on Jason and Medea. Notice there's no mention of Medea being a wicked wife. Homer, Hesiod's contemporary, also briefly mentions Jason in both his epic works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, but oddly enough, he doesn't mention Medea at all. The only women Homer associates with Jason are the goddess Hera, who is credited with helping Jason on his perilous sea voyage, and a Lemnian queen named Hypsipyle, who bore Jason a son named Eueneus. Since Medea is entirely absent from Homer, we need to move on to our next set of early accounts, which are the first to mention the unhappy fate of Medea's children. What's fascinating about these sources, some of which we only know about thanks to Alexandrian scholars writing in the 3rd century BCE, is that they absolve Medea of her most heinous crime, that of deliberately killing her children. There are 2 equally tragic versions of the tale. In one version, the people of Corinth, ancient Ephyra, decide to rise up against Medea, either because she had killed King Creon and Princess Glauce, or simply because they no longer wanted to be ruled by a foreign queen. This sudden revolt causes Medea to have to flee for her life, leaving her husband and children behind in the city. When the mob is unable to get their hands on Medea, they turn their wrath on her young children, who have taken sanctuary in the temple of Hera. Since they are under the protection of a goddess, the children are supposed to be safe, but the people of Corinth murder them anyway. It's not clear where Jason was at the time, why he didn't protect his children from the mob, or why the mob didn't turn their wrath on him. We only know that the children were the victims of a terrible crime. The second version of the story claims that the children died by accident, while their mother was trying to make them immortal. The story goes that while in Corinth, once again ancient Ephyra, Medea caught the attention of the king of the gods, Zeus, a well-known philanderer who had a penchant for cheating on Hera, his lawful wife. Terrified of Hera's wrath, Medea refused his advances, and a grateful Hera promised Medea that she would grant Medea's children immortality. Apparently, this involved burying the children under her temple in Ephyra, and then waiting for them to spring up out of the ground immortal. But something went terribly wrong, because the children never came back to life. They were simply buried alive. Either way, the story ends with the people of Corinth founding a hero cult to the children in order to appease their unhappy ghosts. Now, the good news is that this story is unlikely to be true. Medea was probably not a sorceress queen of Corinth/Ephyra, she probably didn't murder her children, and scholars aren't even sure if this Corinthian child cult existed, although the 1st century travel writer Pausanias insisted it used to exist, but that the cult ended once Rome conquered Greece in the 2nd century BCE. With that said, there's still a chance this very sad legend is based on real crimes against children. During the Bronze Age, which lasted from about 3300 to 1200 BCE, child sacrifice, though rare, was not unheard of around the Mediterranean. From Anatolia to the Levant to mainland Greece, archaeologists have repeatedly found grim evidence of the ritual murder of children. The number of victims ranges anywhere from 1 to upwards of a dozen. But why? Why would people do such a heinous thing? Scholars believe these sacrifices were a desperate attempt by Bronze Age peoples to avoid some sort of natural disaster or appease the wrath of the gods. Whatever the case, these sacrifices did happen, which means that although there is currently no archaeological evidence of child sacrifice in or around Corinth, the Bronze Age site of Ephyra may have been a real location for these heartbreaking rituals. But this still doesn't explain why people began to believe that Medea deliberately sacrificed her children. This shift in tradition starts with the 5th century playwright Euripides. In Euripides' play The Medea, which was first performed in 431 BCE, the Colchian princess bemoans her fate as an exile and resident alien, one with no rights and no future now that her husband Jason has decided to cast her out of his family so he can finally arrange a better life for himself. As an exile with no future ahead of her, Medea decides to rob Jason of his future by murdering his children and the woman who can give him more children. Clearly, Medea is not just sending a message to Jason, but also to the audience. But what is the message? Currently, there are a number of competing theories as to why Euripides changed the story of Medea's children so drastically, but there are a couple of theories that stand out. One is that the play is a social commentary on the state of anxiety the Athenians were experiencing in the lead-up to the Peloponnesian War, which broke out that same year. Another even more compelling theory is that the play is a scathing political commentary on a law passed around 450 BCE, which stated that Athenian citizenship would only be granted to those with Athenian-born parents. The problem with this law is it immediately disenfranchised an entire generation of young Athenian children whose fathers had already taken wives from either another city-state or even another country. And now those children were coming of age in 431 and were likely disgruntled with their liminal status as resident aliens with limited rights. Therefore, it's possible Euripides' unique take on the Medea legend is a warning. If Athens didn't resolve their messy citizenship issue, like Jason, the city could face dire consequences. If true, that would explain the change in Medea's story. But it still doesn't explain why Medea is constantly portrayed as having godlike powers, or why ancient writers make her immortal. Could it be that Medea was a forgotten goddess? At first, it looks doubtful. There's simply no evidence whatsoever the Greeks worshipped Medea. There are no surviving shrines to her, and her name does not appear in linear B tablets from the Bronze Age. But then again, Medea has always been portrayed as a foreign princess. Is it possible she was once an Eastern goddess whose cult or mythology was known to the early Greeks who traveled to the Black Sea between the Late Bronze Age and the Early Iron Age? The answer is maybe. We don't have any direct evidence from Colchis itself, but Colchis was on the edge of the Hittite Empire, and ancient Hittite texts record two different versions of a tale that sounds an awful lot like Jason and Medea's encounter with the serpent that guards the Golden Fleece. In the first story, the Hittite storm god Teshub clashes with a powerful serpent-like dragon named Ilyanka. Ilyanka beats Teshub and takes both the god's eyes and heart. To avenge himself upon the dragon, the storm god marries a daughter of a poor man. Together they have a son named Saruma, who grows up and marries the daughter of the dragon Ilyanka. Teshub tells his son to ask for the return of the storm god's eyes and heart as a wedding gift, which the son does. With his body restored, the storm god goes off to face the dragon Ilyanka once more. But just as Teshub is about to vanquish Ilyanka, Saruma realizes he's been used by his own father, and so demands that if the storm god is going to kill his father-in-law, then Teshub should take his life as well. This story of a parent killing their child is a rather familiar story by now, but what does it have to do with Medea? Well, this is where the second story comes into play. In the second, older version of the tale, Teshub keeps his eyes and heart, but still loses a battle with Ilyanka. He then goes to his daughter, the goddess Inara, for advice. Being clever, she comes up with a plan. She'll recruit the hero Hypatia and hide him in a great banquet hall. Then she'll invite Ilyanka to a banquet and ply the great serpent with massive quantities of food and, most importantly, wine. Once Ilyanka falls into a stupor, the hero Hypatia will tie the serpent up and Teshub can finally finish him off. All parties agree to the plan, but there's a catch. Hypatia will only cooperate if Inara becomes his lover. The goddess agrees, and the heroes take down the giant serpent. Afterwards, Inara stays with Hypatia and even builds him a splendid home to live in. The only thing she asks of him in return is to never look outside the house, lest he see his family and demand to go back home. The hero promises to do as Inara says, but predictably, he ends up disregarding this simple command. What happens next isn't clear. The text is garbled or lost, but if history has taught us anything, it's that it's never a good idea to go against the gods. At any rate, it's a sensational story, and it's possible that when the Greeks started exploring the areas around the Black Sea in either the Late Bronze Age or Early Iron Age, they heard this Hittite legend of gods, heroes, and dragons and incorporated it into their own traditions, which by the Archaic period included a good number of fish tales about the things these intrepid sailors encountered while out traveling, perhaps giving us the origins of not just Medea, but Jason and the Argonauts. And thus we may have solved the mystery of Medea's origins, but we still have one final question that needs to be answered. How did Medea and Jason get caught up in a story about a golden fleece located in Colchis? There are a couple of possibilities here. One is that a ram's fleece represented kingship and authority, and so chose a golden fleece as a symbol of Jason's inherent right to rule Iolcus. The second possibility is that the Golden Fleece was originally a garbled traveler's tale about how the people of Colchis used a fleece to collect bits of gold lodged in riverbeds. And in fact, not only is this practice still going on in the region of Georgia today, but in the same area, as seen in a 2013 documentary by David Adams, a fleece is still given as the top prize in horse racing. Therefore, both Jason's inheritance and Medea's homeland, located on the edge of the Hittite Empire, are represented by this golden fleece. By now, it's pretty clear that the story of Medea, Jason, and the Argonauts didn't come from just one source. It sounds like a mix of Eastern and Western beliefs that started in the Bronze Age and ended in late antiquity, which would explain how Medea may have gone from immortal helper maiden to murderous mother. But what are we to make of her now? Is Medea a hero who beats the odds and outsmarts her enemies, a victim of a brutal social and political construct, or a victimizer, a manipulative sociopath who will always put her comfort and safety above others? The uncomfortable truth is, She's all of the above. She represents every aspect of the human condition, all the virtues and vices we're capable of, all the consequences of our social and political spheres. Perhaps that's why she continues to fascinate us. There's nobody else quite like Medea. Thank you so much for supporting History and Games, Sorceress. See you later.